Emma Collins clutched the heavy leather folder against her chest as the conference room began to spin. She blinked hard, trying to focus on the quarterly financial reports spread across the long mahogany table, and the black numbers blurred together like watercolours left out in the rain. The central air conditioning hummed a steady frigid note overhead designed to keep the executives sharp, yet her skin felt unbearably hot. Beads of cold sweat formed along her hairline, despite the chill that had the other board members casually reaching for their tailored suit jackets. At the head of the table, Julian Rivers stood his commanding presence, swallowing the room as he addressed the key investors. His bespoke navy suit fit flawlessly across his broad shoulders, and his dark hair was styled with the casual precision that money and absolute power brought. At 32, Julian had built Rivers Technology into a ruthless empire in Manhattan, and everyone in that room knew they breathed only because he allowed it. His voice carried a cold, unyielding authority as he dismantled a competitor's projection. But Emma could barely hear him over the violent rushing sound in her ears. She had been his executive assistant for 2 grueling years, handling everything from international acquisitions to his closely guarded personal schedule. She prided herself on being an unbreakable machine, the one person Julian could look at without speaking and know the job was already done. Right now, however, her own body was staging a vicious mutiny in the worst possible moment. The nausea hit her like a physical blow to the stomach. Emma pressed her lips together so hard she tasted iron, willing herself to hold on. The board was voting in 10 minutes. She needed to document the exact phrasing of the resolution. She could not afford to show weakness in a room that fed on it. Then her vision darkened at the edges, collapsing inward into a narrow tunnel. The solid floor seemed to tilt violently sideways. Emma let go of the folder, trying to grip the edge of the table, to ground herself, but her knees simply turned to water. The heavy thud of her body hitting the expensive carpet was swallowed by a sudden, deafening silence. The last thing her fading consciousness registered was the sharp scraping of a chair being shoved back violently, and Julian shouting her name, his legendary, unshakable composure shattering into absolute panic. When consciousness dragged her back from the dark, Emma found herself lying on the leather sofa at the far end of the boardroom. The murmur of panicked voices buzzed around her, but her blurry vision locked onto only one thing. Julian was kneeling on the floor beside her. The CEO, who never touched anyone, was gripping her cold hand so tightly it ached his face drained of all colour. His grey eyes, usually so guarded and calculating, searched hers with an intensity that made her chest physically tighten. "Emma, can you hear me? Stay awake! Look at me!" His voice was ragged, completely stripped of its corporate armour. "I am okay." She forced the whisper past her dry throat, though the room was still tilting. "I just need to sit up." "You are not okay. You dropped like a stone." Julian did not loosen his grip. He turned his head slightly, barking an order at the terrified VP of Operations hovering nearby. "Clear the room. The meeting is over. Someone get my car to the lobby right now." "No, Julian, the investors." Emma tried to protest, but her voice was weak. "I do not care about the investors." The words snapped out of him, sharp and absolute. He slipped one arm behind her back and the other under her knees, lifting her effortlessly against his chest. "I am taking you to the hospital." Within 10 minutes, they were in the back of his private SUV, the driver tearing through the Manhattan traffic. Julian refused to let go of her hand. His jaw was locked tight, a muscle ticking wildly in his cheek. Emma leaned her head against the tinted window, too exhausted to fight him, her stomach still churning violently. For weeks she had dismissed the constant fatigue, the morning sickness, the dizziness as burnout from the 70-hour work weeks. But sitting in the heavy silence of the car with Julian's heat radiating next to her, a terrifying suspicion began to take root in the pit of her stomach. At the emergency room, the power dynamic shifted in a way Emma had never seen. Julian bypassed the crowded waiting area, his presence alone commanding a private room and a senior doctor within minutes. He stood rigidly in the corner of the sterile room as the nurses drew her blood and checked her vitals. When the doctor ordered a rush ultrasound, a flicker of raw terror passed through Emma's eyes, but Julian stepped forward, his large hand wrapping around hers. "I am staying right here," he murmured, a promise vibrating in his low tone. The ultrasound room was suffocatingly quiet, save for the rhythmic mechanical hum of the machine. The technician dimmed the lights and spread a cold, clear gel across Emma's lower abdomen. Julian stood inches away, staring at the monitor with an unreadable expression. Emma closed her eyes, praying for it to be stress and ulcer, anything but the one truth that would destroy the careful walls they had rebuilt. "There it is." The technician's voice was bright, cutting through the heavy air. "Well, no wonder you fainted, Miss Collins. Your blood pressure is low, which is perfectly normal for the first trimester. Congratulations." The machine amplified a rapid whooshing sound. A heartbeat, fast and strong. Emma stopped breathing. The cold room seemed to vanish. Pregnant. She was pregnant. Her hands began to shake uncontrollably on the examination table. All she could see was that night 3 months ago. The night the merger closed, when the adrenaline and the expensive scotch had stripped away their professional boundaries. The night Julian had looked at her not as an assistant, but as a starving man looking at water. They had broken every rule on the leather couch in his office, desperate and tangled whispering promises that evaporated in the harsh morning light. They had agreed to bury it, to never speak of it, to pretend they were just boss and employee. Now the proof of that night was echoing on a hospital monitor for the world to hear. The technician left the room to print the charts, leaving a suffocating silence in her wake. Julian had not moved. He stared at the black and white screen, his breathing shallow. Emma slowly pulled her shirt down her fingers, trembling so badly she could barely manage the fabric. She squeezed her eyes shut, waiting for the cold CEO to return, waiting for him to calculate the PR damage, to offer a settlement, tell her to handle the problem quietly. Instead, the mattress dipped as Julian sat on the edge of the table. He reached out his warm fingers, gently capturing her shaking chin, forcing her to look at him. His grey eyes were entirely stripped of defences, wide and shining with an emotion she could not name. His thumb stroked her jawline, trembling slightly. "Emma!" His voice broke on her name. The ruthless billionaire was entirely gone. "Is that child mine?" She swallowed hard, a single tear escaping and tracking down her cheek over his thumb. "Yes, it is yours." Julian closed his eyes, inhaling a sharp, shuddering breath, as if he had been punched. When he opened them again, the mask was permanently shattered. He leaned his forehead against hers, his hands gripping her shoulders as if she were the only solid thing left in the universe. "I am not running from this," he whispered fiercely against her skin. "Do you hear me? I am not letting you do this alone." The following week was a chaotic blur of fragile hope and whispered promises. Julian was true to his word about being present, though his presence felt like a storm constantly shifting directions. He would show up at a modest third-floor walk-up in Brooklyn at dawn, holding expensive artisan coffee and fresh pastries, his eyes heavy with exhaustion. He demanded she take medical leave. He hired a private chef to drop off organic meals, and he texted her constantly between his high-stakes meetings. For a few fleeting, dangerous days, Emma allowed herself to believe that the walls between them were finally crumbling. She allowed herself to imagine a future where the billionaire actually wanted the assistant. But the corporate world was not built on fairy tales, and reality always came to collect its debts. Julian's schedule grew erratic. His phone would buzz incessantly during his visits, and his face would tighten before he stepped out into the hallway to speak in hushed, tense tones. When Emma asked what was wrong, he would simply kiss her forehead, his eyes dark with secrets, and say he was handling some family board issues. Emma, desperate to maintain some sense of normalcy and independence, insisted on returning to work. She could not just sit in her cheap apartment waiting for a man who belonged to a different stratosphere. On a crisp Tuesday morning during her lunch break, Emma walked down to the lobby of the Rivers Technology Building. She craved fresh air and the anonymity of the crowded New York streets. She stopped by the corner newsstand to buy a bottle of water. As she handed a $5 bill to the vendor, her eyes caught the glossy cover of the Financial Times lifestyle section displayed prominently on the rack. Her heart simply stopped beating. The headline was printed in bold, elegant silver letters. $1 billion union tech mogul, Julian Rivers to wed socialite Victoria Sterling in Grand Spring ceremony. Beneath the crushing words was a high-resolution photograph of Julian. He was wearing a tuxedo, his arm wrapped firmly around the waist of a breathtakingly beautiful blonde woman draped in diamonds. They looked like royalty. They looked perfect. Emma's blood turned to ice in her veins. Her throat tightened so fast she choked on her own breath. The vendor tried to hand her the change, but her fingers were paralyzed. She numbly grabbed the magazine, her vision swimming as she flipped to the centerfold. The article detailed how the two powerful dynasties had been intertwined for decades. How the engagement had been formally agreed upon 6 months ago. 6 months. He was engaged to another woman 3 months before that late night in his office. He was engaged when he touched her, when he undressed her, when he whispered her name into the dark. He was engaged every morning. He brought her coffee, and every night he swore he was not going to leave her alone in this pregnancy. The physical pain of the betrayal hit her stomach like a blade. Emma stumbled away from the stand, dropping her water bottle on the concrete. She pressed her hand hard against her mouth to hold back the sob clawing its way up her throat. The world spun violently. She was not a partner. She was not a love story. She was just the pregnant secretary. The dirty little secret he was trying to manage before his high society wedding. She did not return to the office. Emma walked for miles, letting the cold wind numb her skin until she finally reached her apartment. She locked the door, slid down the cheap wood paneling, and let the tears violently tear through her. She cried for the baby growing inside her. She cried for the dignity she had compromised. But mostly she cried because she had been stupid enough to fall in love with a man who was never hers to begin with. By 8:00 p.m., the incessant knocking on her door rattled the hinges. "Emma, open the door. I know you are in there." Julian's voice was dark with panic. "Your security pass was flagged, leaving the building at noon. You did not answer any of my calls." "Emma, please." Emma sat on the edge of her faded sofa, staring blindly at the wall. She forced herself to stand up. She wiped her mascara-stained cheeks, pulled her spine straight, and unlocked the door. Julian burst in his suit jacket, missing his tie discarded. He reached for her immediately, his hands frantic as they gripped her arms. "Are you okay? Did something happen with the baby? Why did you leave work?" "Do not touch me." Her voice was barely a whisper, but it cracked like a whip in the small room. Julian froze. His hands dropped slowly to his sides. He looked at her bloodshot eyes, her trembling frame and the magazine she had left sitting face up on the coffee table. The air was sucked out of the room. Julian's face went entirely pale. "Emma," he started, his voice suddenly hollow. "Let me explain." Explain what Emma choked out, the anger finally bursting through her agony. "That you are getting married. That your picture-perfect bride is picking out flowers while you are sneaking into Brooklyn to bring pastries to your pregnant assistant." It is an arranged marriage, Emma. It means nothing. Julian took a desperate step forward. My father signed the agreements before he died. It is a merger between our family holdings. I do not love Victoria. I barely even know her. Then would you not tell me? Emma screamed, the sound tearing at her throat. Why did you sleep with me? Why did you make me feel like I meant something when you already belonged to someone else? Because you are the only real thing in my life. Julian roared back, the raw desperation in his voice shaking the windows. He dragged both hands through his hair, pacing the small space like a caged animal. Every single breath I take is owned by the board, by the family trust, by expectations. That night with you was the only time I felt alive. And when I found out about the baby, Emma, I wanted it. I want you. But you are still going to marry her? Emma stated it not as a question, but as a death sentence. Julian stopped pacing, his jaw clenched tight. The silence that followed was the loudest sound Emma had ever heard. The hesitation, the corporate calculation fighting against his own heart. I have to untangle the contracts. He pleaded softly, stepping closer, but not daring to touch her. It takes time. If I break it now, the financial fallout will destroy thousands of jobs. I just need you to be patient. I will take care of you and the baby. I will buy you a house. I will make sure you want for nothing. You want me to be your mistress? Emma cut him off, the disgust coating every syllable. You want me to hide in the shadows with your bastard child while you pose for magazines with your legitimate wife. No, that is not what I am saying. Julian looked horrified, but the truth was already standing starkly between them. Yes, it is! Emma walked over to the small coat rack and pulled her worn cardigan off the hook. Her hands were shaking, but her chin was held high. I grew up with nothing, Julian. But I have my pride. I will not let my child grow up thinking they are a dirty secret that needs to be hidden in a bought house. Emma, please! Julian's voice broke. He looked like a man watching his world burn to ash. Do not do this! I love you. The words hit her chest like bullets, but she refused to bleed. She picked up her keys from the counter and looked him dead in the eye, her voice dropping to a chilling, absolute calm. You do not know how to love anyone, Julian. You only know how to own things. And you do not own me. She walked past him, opened the door, and walked out into the cold hallway, leaving the billionaire standing completely alone in the center of her cheap apartment, surrounded by the wreckage of the only real thing he had ever had. The heavy cardboard boxes piled in the center of the cramped living room felt like tombstones marking the end of Emma's brief, foolish dream. 2 days had passed since she walked out on Julian, and the silence from him had been absolute. No phone calls, no frantic knocking at her door. No bodyguards stationed outside her building. It was exactly what she had demanded, yet the sheer finality of it left a gaping, bleeding hole in her chest. She had drawn her boundary, and the billionaire had simply retreated to his high society world, confirming her deepest fears. She was dispensable. Emma taped another box shut, her hands moving mechanically. The morning sickness had been brutal, draining the colour from her face and leaving her violently trembling over the bathroom sink for hours. She wiped a stray tear from her cheek, angry at her own weakness. She had already submitted her formal resignation via email to Human Resources citing urgent family health matters. Her plan was to move to upstate New York, far away from Manhattan, far away from the empire that bore the river's name. She would raise this baby alone. She would survive. She always did. A sharp, authoritative knock at her apartment door shattered the oppressive silence. Emma froze the tape dispenser slipping from her fingers. Her traitorous heart slammed against her ribs, jumping into her throat. Was it him? Had he come back? She smoothed down her oversized grey sweater, her palms sweating, and slowly walked towards the door. Taking a deep breath, she unlatched the chain and pulled it open, bracing herself for Julian's intense storm-grey eyes. Instead, she found herself staring at an elegant older woman draped in a flawless cream cashmere coat. The woman's posture was impeccably straight, radiating a quiet, terrifying kind of wealth that did not need to shout to be recognized. She had Julian's striking facial structure, the same high cheekbones, the same piercing, intelligent grey eyes. Emma Collins. The woman's voice was smooth-cultured, but completely devoid of malice. I am Diane Rivers, Julian's mother. May I come in? Emma's stomach dropped into an icy abyss. Her fingers gripped the doorframe so tightly, her knuckles turned bone white. The billionaire's mother had arrived. Emma knew exactly how this script played out. The matriarch would offer a discreet, heavy envelope full of cash, demand a non-disclosure agreement, and politely threaten her to disappear to save the family's reputation before the grand wedding. If you are here to pay me off, Mrs. Rivers, you can save your breath. Emma's voice shook, but she lifted her chin, her pride refusing to buckle. I do not want a single cent of your family's money. I am leaving the city tomorrow. You and your son will never have to see me again. Diane did not flinch. Her gaze softened slightly, sweeping over Emma's pale face, the dark circles under her eyes, and the half-packed boxes behind her. You have every right to be fiercely protective, Emma. But I did not come here to insult you. Nor did I come to protect the company. I came to apologize on behalf of my idiot son. Please, just give me 5 minutes. Shock momentarily paralyzed Emma. She stepped aside, holding the door open. Diane walked into the modest apartment, the scent of expensive Chanel perfume contrasting sharply with the smell of cheap cleaning supplies and old radiator heat. She did not look at the worn furniture with disgust. Instead, she sat gracefully on the edge of the faded sofa, folding her manicured hands in her lap. He told you about the baby? Emma asked quietly, wrapping her arms around her own waist defensively. He told me everything. Diane sighed, the polished matriarch, suddenly looking deeply tired. For the past 48 hours, my son has been tearing his own company apart. He has not slept. He has not eaten. He called a hostile board meeting to aggressively dismantle the Sterling merger. He is facing lawsuits that could cost him billions, and he does not care. He is burning his own empire to the ground, Emma, because the only thing he actually wants is you. Emma's breath hitched. She pressed her hand to her chest, trying to stop the sudden violent hammering of her heart. But he is engaged. He lied to me. He hid her from me while pretending. He did not pretend what he felt for you. Diane interrupted gently but firmly. Emma, you need to understand the cage Julian has lived in. My late husband was a tyrant. He viewed Julian not as a son, but as a corporate asset. The engagement to Victoria Sterling was written into a binding family trust when Julian was 25. If he broke it, he would lose controlling interest in the company he built with his own blood and sweat. He was suffocating under the weight of an arranged life he hated. But what about Victoria? Emma whispered, the guilt of being the other woman still gnawing at her conscience. She is beautiful. She is his equal. It is cruel to humiliate her like this. Diane let out a bitter, humorless laugh. Victoria Sterling is just as miserable as my son. She is deeply in love with a pediatric surgeon named Christopher Lane. She has been for 3 years, but her father threatened to ruin the young doctor's career if she did not marry Julian. Both of them were trapped in a gilded prison, too bound by duty and fear to break the chains. Emma stood completely still, her mind racing as the pieces of the puzzle aggressively snapped into place. The tense phone calls, the suffocating pressure Julian always carried, the way he clung to her as if she were his only source of oxygen. And then you happened. Diane looked up, her grey eyes shining with unshed tears. You and this baby. You gave my son a reason to finally fight back. You gave him the courage to choose his own life. But when you walked out, you took his hope with you. He thinks he destroyed the only pure thing he ever had. Before Emma could process the magnitude of Diane's words, her cell phone sitting on the kitchen counter began to ring. The screen flashed Julian's name. Emma stared at it, her throat completely closed. "Answer it!" Diane urged softly. With trembling fingers, Emma picked up the phone and pressed it to her ear. "Hello? Emma!" Julian's voice was wrecked, a raw, gravelly sound that broke her heart instantly. "I know you hate me. I know you are packing. But I am begging you. I need you to come to the Le Bernardin private dining room on 5th Avenue tonight at 8 o'clock. "Julian, I cannot." "Please," he cut in, his tone desperate, stripping away all his pride. "Both families are there. I am ending it tonight, Emma. All of it. But I need you to be there. I need to look at you when I do it, so I remember what I am fighting for. If you do not show up, I will know you are truly gone. But if there is even a fraction of a chance that you can forgive me, please come." The line went dead. Emma slowly lowered the phone. The physical ache in her chest morphed into something entirely different: fear and a terrifying, blinding sliver of hope. She looked at the packing boxes, then looked at Diane. The older woman stood up, offering a small, reassuring smile. "Put down the packing tape, Emma," Diane said gently. "Let my driver take you to buy a dress. It is time you let my son show you exactly who he is willing to become for you." The private dining room at Le Bernardin was a masterpiece of intimidating luxury. Crystal chandeliers cast a cold, brilliant light over the long, polished mahogany table. The air was thick with the scent of white truffles, expensive vintage champagne, and the suffocating tension of billionaires preparing to merge their empires. At the head of the table sat Arthur Sterling, Victoria's father, holding a crystal glass of scotch and loudly discussing the media rollout for the upcoming spring wedding. Victoria sat beside him, looking breathtaking in a designer silk dress, but her eyes were vacant, staring blankly at her untouched plate. Julian sat directly opposite them. He wore a severe black suit, no tie, his top button undone. He looked lethal. His jaw was locked, his knuckles white around his water glass, his grey eyes constantly darting toward the heavy mahogany double doors of the room. He had not spoken a word in 20 minutes. At exactly 8:15 p.m., the heavy doors opened. The entire table fell completely silent. The clinking of silver forks stopped. Arthur Sterling frowned, annoyed by the interruption. Emma stood in the doorway. She was wearing a simple, elegant midnight blue dress that Diane had helped her choose. It draped perfectly over her frame, hinting at the very slight new curve of her stomach. Her heart was hammering against her ribs so violently she felt dizzy. The sheer hostility radiating from the Sterling family was a physical weight pushing against her chest. But then her eyes found Julian. The moment he saw her, the dangerous coiled tension in Julian's shoulders vanished. He exhaled a ragged breath, closing his eyes for a fraction of a second, and pure, overwhelming relief. He did not care about the stares. He did not care about the billionaires at the table. He stood up immediately, the legs of his chair scraping loudly against the marble floor, and walked straight toward her. "Who is this?" Arthur Sterling barked, his face flushing with immediate anger. "Julian, we are in a private family meeting. Why is your assistant here?" Julian ignored him completely. He stopped in front of Emma, his large hands gently wrapping around her trembling fingers. He pulled her close, his thumb brushing over her knuckles in a silent, desperate vow. "You came." He whispered, his eyes entirely focused on hers, completely ignoring the room. "I came," Emma whispered back, her throat tight. Julian turned, keeping Emma's hand tightly encased in his, and faced the table. He did not let her stand in the background. He pulled her to stand right beside his chair, forcing the entire room to acknowledge her presence. The power dynamic shifted violently. He was shielding her with his own body, his stance screaming absolute protection. "She is not my assistant, Arthur." Julian's voice was terrifyingly calm, a cold, sharp blade cutting through the heavy air. "Her name is Emma Collins. She is the woman I love, and she is carrying my child." A collective gasp echoed in the room. Victoria's mother dropped her crystal glass. It shattered against her porcelain plate. Arthur Sterling's face turned a violent shade of purple. He stood up, slamming his fists onto the table. "Are you out of your mind?" Arthur roared, the veins in his neck bulging. "You bring a pregnant secretary into this room to humiliate my daughter. We have contracts, Julian. We have a $1 billion merger dependent on this union. I will ruin you. I will pull the Sterling board members tomorrow and strip you of your own company." "Do it!" Julian fired back, his voice raising to drown out the older man, his eyes flashing with lethal defiance. "Pull your board members! Sue me for breach of contract! Take the stock! I do not give a damn about the money, Arthur. I am cancelling the wedding. I will not spend the rest of my life in a miserable arranged contract, and I will not hide the mother of my child in the shadows. The engagement is over." "How dare you!" Arthur stepped forward, raising his hand aggressively. Julian moved instantly, stepping fully in front of Emma, his chest shielding her entirely from the older man's wrath. "If you take one more step towards her, Arthur, I will personally ensure your holding company is liquidated by Friday." Julian's voice dropped to a lethal, deadly whisper. "Do not test me." Emma clutched the back of Julian's suit jacket, her stomach twisting with anxiety, but the sheer, overwhelming protective force radiating from him made her tears spill over. He was doing it. He was throwing away his empire, just to hold her hand in the light. "Father, stop!" The sudden sharp voice cut through the shouting. Everyone froze and turned. Victoria Sterling was standing up. Her hands were shaking, but for the first time in years, her eyes were completely clear and fiercely alive. "Sit down, Victoria. This does not concern you," Arthur snapped. "Yes, it does!" Victoria yelled, her voice trembling with years of suppressed rage. "The wedding is cancelled, Father. And not just because of Julian. Because I refuse to marry him too." Arthur looked as if he had been physically struck. "What are you talking about? You are hysterical." "I am not hysterical." Victoria stepped away from the table, taking a deep, shuddering breath. "I am in love with Christopher Lane. I have been for 3 years. I let you threaten him. I let you bully me into this fake, miserable arrangement because I was terrified of losing my inheritance. But looking at Julian right now, looking at how fiercely he is fighting for the woman he loves, I realize how pathetic I have been. I am done being your corporate pawn, Father. I am choosing Christopher." The room descended into a stunned, suffocating silence. The absolute destruction of the Billionaire contract had just occurred from both sides. Arthur Sterling opened his mouth to scream, but no words came out. He looked at his daughter's defiant face, then at Julian's unyielding stance. Diane Rivers, who had been sitting quietly at the end of the table the entire time, finally stood up. She picked up her designer clutch with perfect grace. "Well," she said smoothly, her voice echoing in the quiet room, I believe this dinner is concluded. Ashra, send the legal paperwork to our lawyers. Victoria, darling, go find your doctor. Arthur Sterling stormed out of the room without another word, his wife trailing frantically behind him. Victoria paused near the door. She looked at Julian, then at Emma. A genuine soft smile broke across her face. Thank you, she whispered to Emma. You saved both of us. When the heavy doors finally closed, leaving the room completely empty, except for them, the adrenaline suddenly drained from the air. The silence was absolute. Julian slowly turned to face Emma. The lethal CEO mask was completely gone, leaving behind a man stripped bare, his chest heaving with emotion. He reached out with trembling hands, gently framing her face. His thumbs wiped away the tears tracking down her cheeks. I am so sorry, Emma. His voice broke thick with unshed tears. I am sorry I was a coward. I am sorry I made you doubt for a single second that you were my entire world. I will spend the rest of my life making this up to you. I will build a new company. I will build 1,000 companies if I have to, as long as I get to come home to you and our baby. Emma looked up into his grey eyes, seeing nothing but raw, devastating honesty. The pain of the past week dissolved, washed away by the absolute certainty of his love. She reached up, covering his hands with hers. You do not need 1,000 companies, Julian. She whispered, her voice thick with emotion, her lips curving into a tearful smile. You just need us. Julian let out a broken sob, pulling her flush against his chest. He buried his face in her neck, holding her, as if she were his gravity, his salvation, his very breath. In the center of the shattered billionaire empire, surrounded by the ruins of high society expectations, the CEO finally had exactly what he wanted. He had her. The transition from a 10,000 square foot Manhattan penthouse to a modest one-bedroom walk-up in Brooklyn should have been a jarring, uncomfortable reality check for a billionaire. But when Julian Rivers arrived at Emma's door 3 days after the explosive dinner at Le Bernardin, he brought only 3 sleek leather suitcases and a look of absolute, unwavering peace. He had stripped away the armor of his corporate life. Wearing a simple grey cashmere sweater and dark jeans, he looked younger, lighter, as if a literal physical weight had been lifted from his broad shoulders. He walked into her small living room, dropping his bags onto the scuffed hardwood floor, and pulled Emma into a deep, consuming kiss. There was no hesitation, no holding back. He was finally completely hers. Are you absolutely sure about this? Emma asked softly against his lips, her hands resting on his chest, feeling the steady, strong rhythm of his heart. Your penthouse has staff, Julian. It has security, a private elevator, and a view of the entire skyline. This place barely has consistent hot water. Julian cupped her face, his thumbs gently stroking her cheekbones. Emma, I would sleep on the fire escape if it meant I got to wake up next to you. That penthouse was a museum. It was a holding cell. This, he looked around the cramped, warm space filled with her scent and the life they were building. This is the first place that has ever felt like home. Over the next few weeks, the ruthless CEO transformed in ways Emma could never have anticipated. He seamlessly integrated into her world. His impeccably tailored Tom Ford suits hung shoulder to shoulder with her inexpensive cardigans in the tiny closet. His expensive luxury watch sat on the chipped ceramic dish by the sink. He learned exactly how to jiggle the handle of the temperamental coffee maker to make it brew, and he insisted on cooking breakfast for her every single morning, hovering protectively to ensure she was eating enough for the baby. The starkest contrast, however, happened on a rainy Sunday afternoon. Emma was sitting on the sofa nursing a cup of herbal tea, watching the man who routinely dismantled rival tech companies struggle with a flat-pack wooden crib. Julian was sitting cross-legged on the floor, surrounded by wooden slat screws and a violently unhelpful instruction manual. He was frowning deeply. A smudge of dust on his cheek, his sleeves rolled up to his elbows, revealing the strong cords of his forearms. He held a small Allen wrench, as if it were a foreign artifact. "I run a company that develops cutting-edge artificial intelligence," Julian muttered darkly, glaring at a wooden panel. "I oversee engineers who build quantum processors. Why is it mathematically impossible to align part A with part C?" Emma let out a soft, genuine laugh, the sound filling the small room and making Julian's eyes immediately dart to her. The sheer warmth in his gaze stole her breath. "Do you want me to call a handyman?" She teased, her eyes sparkling. "Or maybe the head of your engineering department?" "Absolutely not." Julian shifted closer to the crib, his jaw set with a stubborn, endearing determination. "I'm building my child's bed, even if it takes me until he goes to college." He spent 3 hours wrestling with the wooden pieces, occasionally swearing under his breath, refusing any of her attempts to help. When he finally tightened the last screw, he stood up, wiping the sweat from his forehead with the back of his hand. He looked at the sturdy, perfectly assembled white crib in the corner of her bedroom, and a profound, quiet awe washed over his features. He walked over to Emma, pulling her up gently from the sofa, and wrapped his arms around her from behind. He rested his large hands securely over her swelling belly. "It's real," he whispered against her hair, his voice thick with emotion. "We are actually doing this." The reality of their impending parenthood hit its absolute peak 2 weeks later during Emma's 20-week anatomy scan. The sterile hospital room felt entirely different this time. There was no terror, no suffocating uncertainty. Julian sat beside the examination table, holding her hand so securely she felt entirely anchored to him. The doctor applied the warm gel and moved the transducer across Emma's abdomen. The screen flickered to life, and suddenly the grainy image of a fully formed baby appeared. Tiny hands, tiny feet, a perfectly shaped spine. The rapid thudding heartbeat echoed through the speakers, filling the room with the undeniable sound of life. "Everything looks absolutely perfect, Emma. The growth is right on track." The doctor smiled, clicking a few buttons to measure the limbs. "Would you two like to know the gender today, or are you keeping it a surprise?" Emma turned to look at Julian. His grey eyes were locked onto the monitor, completely transfixed. A single tear had escaped and was tracking silently down his strong jaw. The billionaire who negotiated billion-dollar contracts without blinking was entirely undone by a grainy black and white screen. "We want to know," Julian said, his voice dropping to a rough, breathless whisper. The doctor adjusted the wand, pausing for a moment before turning the screen slightly more toward them. "Well, congratulations, Mom and Dad. You are having a boy." "A boy," Emma gasped, pressing her free hand over her mouth. "A son." She looked at Julian, and the expression on his face shattered her heart in the most beautiful way possible. The protective armor he had worn his entire life completely disintegrated. He leaned down, burying his face against Emma's neck, his broad shoulders shaking slightly as he finally let go of the immense pressure he had carried. "A son," Julian choked out, pressing a desperate, reverent kiss to her jaw, then leaning down to kiss the curve of her stomach. "A little boy." Later that night, wrapped together in the small bed, as the rain tapped gently against the Brooklyn windowpane, Julian held Emma tight against his chest. His hand rested over her womb, feeling the faint, fluttering movements of the life inside her. "I spent my entire life terrified of becoming my father," Julian whispered into the dark room, his voice heavy with past scars. "He was cold. He used people as leverage. He viewed me as an asset, not a son. But sitting in that room today, looking at the screen, I swore to him. I swore to our boy that he will never know a single day of that coldness. He will only ever know how fiercely he is loved. Emma turned in his arms, reaching up to trace the strong line of his jaw in the dim light. He is going to have the best father in the world. What are we going to name him? Julian looked down at her, his eyes shining with a fierce, unwavering devotion. Benjamin, it means son of the right hand. It means strength. But to me, it means the boy who saved my life. Emma smiled, a tear slipping down her cheek, and pulled his face down to hers. Benjamin Rivers! It is perfect. The explosion in the media was not just a storm. It was a devastating hurricane. When the news officially broke that Julian Rivers had violently terminated his engagement to Victoria Sterling, the financial and social worlds of Manhattan went into a frenzy. The stock of both Rivers Technology and the Sterling Holding Group fluctuated wildly. Headlines dominated every major news outlet, blog, and society page. Billion-dollar merger collapses. The runaway CEO and the most dangerous one of all. Who is the mystery woman? Paparazzi swarmed the Rivers Technology headquarters like vultures. They dug through tax records, employee rosters, and society guest lists, desperate to find the woman who had caused one of the most powerful men in the country to burn down his own wedding. But they found absolutely nothing. They found nothing because Julian Rivers did not just wield power, he weaponized it. Anticipating the fallout long before the dinner at Le Bernardin, Julian had initiated a complete and ruthless security lockdown around Emma. He had quietly purchased the remaining 3 apartments on Emma's floor in the Brooklyn walk-up, moving out the tenants with massive life-changing financial payouts, and converted the entire level into a highly secured perimeter. 2 elite, discreet ex-military bodyguards were stationed at the stairwell 24/7. Emma's digital footprint was scrubbed clean from the internet by Julian's top cybersecurity engineers. To the outside world, Emma Collins simply did not exist. "You do not have to do all this, Julian," Emma said one morning, watching him aggressively type on his encrypted laptop at her small kitchen table. The table was currently covered in legal briefs and a half-eaten plate of toast. "I am not made of glass. I can handle some reporters." Julian stopped typing. He closed the laptop with a sharp snap and looked up at her. The lethal, commanding CEO energy radiated from him, completely at odds with the domestic setting of her kitchen. "You are carrying my son, Emma," he said, his voice dropping into that dark, uncompromising octave that sent shivers down her spine. "The world out there is vicious. They will dissect your past, they will scrutinize your background. They will call you a gold digger, and they will try to stress you into a breaking point. I will not allow a single camera flash to touch your face. I will not allow a single tabloid to speak your name until you are ready. My wealth is entirely useless if it cannot be used to build an impenetrable wall around my family." He meant every single word. Later that afternoon, Emma sat on the sofa folding tiny baby clothes and accidentally overheard one of Julian's virtual board meetings. He was pacing in the bedroom, the door slightly ajar. "Let the Sterling faction dump their shares." Julian's voice was ice cold, echoing with absolute authority. "Buy them all back at market price. If Arthur Sterling attempts to hostile takeover, the logistics division cut his supply chain algorithms by midnight. I built the software he relies on. Remind him that I hold the kill switch. Do not call me again with his empty threats." Emma paused, holding a tiny blue onesie. She realized with a profound sense of awe that the man who gently rubbed cocoa butter onto her stretching skin every night was currently engaging in financial warfare to protect their peace. He was absorbing all the corporate shrapnel so she wouldn't have to feel a single vibration. That night, the adrenaline of the day faded into a heavy, intimate quiet. The Brooklyn streets outside were silent save for the distant wail of a siren. The room was bathed in the soft amber glow of a single bedside lamp. Emma lay on her side, the physical toll of her third trimester making sleep elusive. Her back ached constantly, and her stomach felt heavy and taut. Julian, sensing her restlessness, shifted closer behind her. He wrapped his strong arm around her waist, pulling her flush against his warm, solid chest. His large hand rested instinctively over her belly, waiting for Benjamin's familiar midnight kicks. "Can't sleep," Julian murmured, pressing a soft kiss to her bare shoulder. "He is practicing kickboxing in my ribs," Emma whispered, a tired smile touching her lips. She placed her hand over his. After a long moment of silence, the vulnerability she usually kept hidden began to surface in the dark room. "Julian, do you ever worry about the damage to your company, to your reputation? You lost billions of dollars to walk away from that contract." Julian sighed softly, his breath warm against her neck. He tightened his grip on her, slightly anchoring her. "Emma, turn around. Look at me." She awkwardly shifted her weight, rolling over to face him. His grey eyes were fully awake, intensely focused, and completely stripped of any corporate armour. In the dim light, she could see the raw, unfiltered truth in his expression. "When I was 22, Julian began, his voice a low, quiet rumble, "I watched my father die in a massive, sterile hospital suite. He had billions in the bank. He had politicians on speed dial, but the room was completely empty. My mother was there out of obligation, and I was there out of duty. He died surrounded by expensive machines, but completely, utterly alone because he had traded every ounce of real human connection for leverage." Julian reached up gently, brushing a stray lock of hair behind her ear, his touch agonizingly tender. "I spent my whole life thinking power was the ability to control a boardroom." He continued, his thumb tracing the line of her jaw. "I thought power was forcing people to bend to your will. But it was a lie. A man is not powerful if he cannot even choose the woman he loves. He is just a well-paid prisoner." Tears pricked the corners of Emma's eyes. She listened, her throat tightening with emotion as the billionaire poured his soul out in the quiet dark. "You gave me the only real power I have ever had," Julian whispered, his voice thick, his forehead resting against hers. "The power to say no to the cage. The power to protect the woman who holds my entire heart. So let the media scream. Let the board members panic. Let the stocks crash. I would burn my own name into the ground before I ever let you go. You and Benjamin are my empire now." Emma let out a shaky breath, the last remnants of her insecurities completely washing away. She reached up, weaving her fingers into his dark hair, and pulled him down into a slow, devastatingly deep kiss. In the silence of the room, surrounded by the invisible shields he had built, she finally understood. The media could write whatever they wanted. The high society could whisper in their elite circles. But none of it mattered, because the most ruthless CEO in New York was currently holding her like she was the only thing keeping him alive. And she knew with absolute certainty that no force on earth would ever be allowed to touch them. At 3:00 in the morning, on a freezing Tuesday in late November, the quiet sanctuary of their Brooklyn apartment was violently disrupted. Emma woke to a sudden sharp pressure in her lower back, followed immediately by a warm rush of fluid soaking the bedsheets. Her breath caught in her throat. She had read the books, she had taken the classes, but nothing prepared her for the raw, primal panic that instantly flooded her veins. Her water had broken 3 weeks early. "Julian, She gasped, her hands instinctively clutching her heavy stomach as the first real contraction ripped through her abdomen. It was not a dull ache. It was a vicious tightening vice that stole all the oxygen from the room. Julian was awake in a fraction of a second. The billionaire who normally calculated global market shifts with icy detachment moved with a terrifying hyper-focused speed. He did not panic. He did not freeze. He threw off the blankets, his eyes locking onto her pale face. He saw the pain twisting her features, and his jaw set into a hard, uncompromising line. "I have got you." His voice was a low, steady rumble that immediately anchored her spinning mind. "Breathe, Emma, just like we practiced. I am right here." Within minutes, he had her dressed in comfortable clothes, the pre-packed hospital bag slung over his shoulder. He did not wait for an ambulance. He carried her down the 3 flights of stairs, his arms a fortress of absolute security, and gently placed her into the back of his waiting armoured SUV. The driver, alerted minutes prior, tore through the empty snow-dusted streets of Manhattan toward the private wing of the Presbyterian Hospital. The pain escalated with ruthless speed. By the time they reached the brightly lit emergency entrance, Emma was blindly gripping the leather armrest, her knuckles white, her teeth gritted, as another wave of agony tore through her. Julian bypassed the triage desk completely. His presence alone, radiating a lethal, untouchable authority, had a team of senior obstetricians rushing them straight into a massive state-of-the-art private delivery suite. For the next 12 hours, the hospital room became the entire universe. The sterile smell of antiseptic, the rhythmic, urgent beeping of the fetal monitor, and the blinding fluorescent lights all blurred together. Emma's body was pushed to the absolute edge of human endurance. The contractions came faster, crashing over her like suffocating tidal waves. She was exhausted, shivering from the adrenaline, her hair damp with sweat and clinging to her forehead. Through every single second of the agonizing ordeal, Julian never left her side. He refused to sit. He refused the coffee the nurses nervously offered him. He stood right beside the bed, his large, warm hands firmly gripping hers. He became her physical anchor to the earth. When the pain became so intense that Emma cried out, her voice breaking into a ragged sob, Julian's face paled, the muscles in his neck standing out in stark relief. He pressed his forehead against hers, taking the brunt of her agony, his voice a constant, fierce whisper in her ear. "You are the strongest person I have ever known," he murmured fiercely, kissing away the tears that slipped down her cheeks. "Look at me, Emma. Do not close your eyes. Look at me. You can do this. I am right here. I am not letting you go." When the doctor announced it was finally time to push, the atmosphere in the room shifted from enduring to critical. The physical exertion required was monumental. Emma felt as though her body was literally tearing apart. The exhaustion was a heavy, suffocating blanket, and for a terrifying second she felt she could not do it. She shook her head, a desperate sob tearing from her throat. "I cannot, Julian. I cannot do it anymore. It hurts too much." Julian leaned down, his face inches from hers. The ruthless CEO, the man who owned half the city, looked at her with such raw, devastating desperation that it pierced straight through the fog of her pain. "Yes, you can!" His voice broke thick with unshed tears and absolute devotion. "You fought the whole world for this baby, Emma. You fought me, you survived everything. Just a little more, my love. Bring our son into the world. Bring Benjamin here. I am holding you. I have got you." Anchored by his voice, fueled by the sheer, unwavering belief in his grey eyes, Emma gripped his hand with the last ounce of her strength. She screamed, bearing down with every fibre of her being, pushing past the pain, past the fear, past the limits of her own body. And then the room fell silent for one agonizing heartbeat. It was followed immediately by the most beautiful, miraculous sound Emma had ever heard in her entire life. A loud, healthy, furious cry pierced the sterile hospital air.
"He is here."
The doctor's voice was triumphant.
"He's perfect."
The nurses quickly wiped down the tiny, squirming body, wrapping him in a warm blanket before gently placing him onto Emma's bare chest. The heavy, suffocating pain vanished, replaced instantly by an overwhelming, blinding wave of pure love. Emma looked down at her son. He had a shock of dark hair, a tiny, scrunched red face, and miniature fists that immediately curled against her skin. He was breathing. He was alive. He was theirs. Oh my God. Emma wept openly, her trembling fingers gently touching the baby's incredibly soft cheek. Hi, Benjamin. I am your mom." She looked up at Julian, and the sight of him made her heart stop. The untouchable billionaire was completely, utterly broken. He dropped to his knees beside the hospital bed, resting his head near Emma's shoulder, right next to his newborn son. His broad shoulders were shaking violently. The man who had never cried, who had locked his emotions in a cold vault for 30 years, was weeping openly without a single shred of shame. He reached out with a trembling finger, gently stroking Benjamin's tiny hand. The baby instantly, reflexively wrapped his microscopic fingers around Julian's large thumb. Julian let out a choked, broken sob at the contact. "Thank you," Julian whispered fiercely, his tears falling onto the pristine hospital sheets as he looked from Benjamin to Emma. "Thank you. I swear on my life I will protect you both until my last breath. You are my family. You are my everything." In that brightly lit delivery room, surrounded by the beeping machines, the empire of River's technology meant absolutely nothing. The wealth, the contracts, the high society expectations were dust. The only power that mattered was the tiny heartbeat resting against Emma's chest and the billionaire kneeling beside them, finally, truly home. 6 months after Benjamin's birth, the dust from the corporate hurricane had finally settled. Julian had not lost his empire. In fact, free from the suffocating sterling contracts, River's technology had aggressively expanded, dominating the market with a renewed, ruthless efficiency. But the man helming the company was entirely different. He rarely worked past 5 o'clock. His cutthroat boardroom meetings were occasionally interrupted by FaceTime calls that he refused to ignore, his lethal grey eyes softening instantly the moment he saw Emma and his son on the screen. It was a Friday evening in early June when Julian requested Emma meet him in the city. He had sent his private driver to pick her up, along with a stunning custom-fitted emerald silk gown. Diane Rivers had happily arrived at the apartment to babysit Benjamin, practically shooing Emma out the door with a knowing, secretive smile. When the town car pulled up to the curb, Emma's breath caught in her throat. The driver opened the door, and she stepped out onto the familiar, pristine pavement of Fifth Avenue. She was standing in front of Le Bernardin, the exact restaurant where almost a year ago she had walked into a room full of hostile billionaires and watched Julian burn his arranged life to the ground for her. A sharp-suited maitre d' was waiting for her at the entrance. "Good evening, Miss Collins. Mr. Rivers has reserved the entire floor for you. Please right this way." Emma's heart hammered against her ribs as she was led through the elegant, softly lit corridors. The restaurant was completely empty. No other patrons, no noise. Just the absolute suffocating luxury that Julian commanded. The maitre d' opened the heavy mahogany double doors of the private VIP dining room and stepped away. Emma walked in. The room was transformed. The massive boardroom-style table had been removed. In its place, the room was filled with thousands of white roses and softly flickering candles that reflected endlessly against the crystal chandeliers. Soft classical string music played from hidden speakers. And standing in the center of it all, looking devastatingly handsome in a classic black tuxedo, was Julian. He looked at her, his eyes sweeping over the emerald gown, the gentle curve of her hips, the soft cascade of her hair. The sheer, overwhelming adoration in his gaze made her knees weak. He walked toward her, taking her hands in his, bringing her knuckles to his lips for a slow, lingering kiss. "You look breathtaking." He murmured, his voice a low dark velvet that sent a shiver down her spine.
What is all this?
Julie Emma asked, her voice trembling slightly, her eyes scanning the sea of roses. "This is the room where I finally became a man," Julian said softly, his grey eyes locking onto hers with absolute intensity. "This is the room where I looked at the power, the money, and the expectations of the elite, and I realised none of it meant a damn thing without you. I brought you back here to overwrite the memory of those people looking down on you. I brought you here to reclaim this space." Julian took a deep breath, the corporate giant completely stripping away every last defence. He slowly dropped to one knee on the marble floor. Emma gasped, her free hand flying to cover her mouth, tears instantly pooling in her eyes. "Emma Collins!" Julian's voice was remarkably steady, ringing, with an undeniable, absolute certainty. "You walked into my life and dismantled every wall I ever built. You endured my cowardice, you suffered with dignity, and you gave me the greatest gift a man could ever receive, our son. You taught me that real power is not about controlling the world. It is about protecting the people you love." He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a sleek black velvet box. He flipped it open, revealing a diamond so flawless, so brilliantly cut, that it seemed to capture the light of the entire room. "I do not want to be just the father of your child. I want to be your husband. I want to be the man who stands beside you for the rest of eternity. I want to spend every single day making sure you never doubt your place in my world. Will you marry me?" "Yes!" Emma sobbed, the tears spilling freely down her cheeks. "Yes, Julian! Absolutely yes!" Julian exhaled a shaky breath, slipping the heavy cold diamond onto her trembling finger. He stood up, wrapping his arms around her waist, lifting her entirely off the floor, as he kissed her with a desperate, consuming passion. It was a kiss that sealed their history and promised their future. The wedding, held 3 months later, was not the massive media-frenzied circus the Sterling merger would have been. It was an exclusive, highly guarded ceremony, held at a private historic estate in the Hudson Valley. But make no mistake, it was the ultimate display of absolute power. The guest list included the true titans of industry, the quiet billionaires who ran the country, and the politicians who owed Julian favours. But Emma was not a frightened assistant hiding in the corner. She walked down the aisle in a custom Oscar de la Renta gown, her head held high, radiating a quiet, untouchable dignity. Julian stood at the altar, holding 9-month-old Benjamin in his arms. The ruthless CEO looked at his bride with such profound, blinding love that a hushed reverence fell over the entire crowd. In the third row, sitting quietly, was Arthur Sterling. He had been invited as a calculated move of dominance. The man who had screamed at Emma, who had called her a pregnant secretary, now sat in silence. He watched as the woman he had tried to crush became the legal, undisputed queen of the river's empire. Arthur lowered his eyes, his posture defeated. He had tried to force a merger with paper and threats, but Julian had built an invincible fortress with loyalty and love. As Emma stood before Julian, repeating her vows, she looked into the grey eyes of the man who had once broken her heart, only to spend the rest of his life putting it back together. He was no longer the conflicted boss. He was her protector, her husband, the father of her child. "I love you, Julian Rivers," she whispered, slipping the gold band onto his finger. "I am yours, Emma, completely and eternally," he replied, pulling her in for a kiss that made the crowd erupt into applause. Later that evening, standing on the balcony of the estate, looking out over the manicured gardens, Julian wrapped his arms around Emma from behind. Benjamin was asleep in his nursery, guarded by the best security money could buy. The world outside was still vicious, still cold, and still obsessed with wealth. But inside their circle, they were completely untouchable. The assistant who had fainted in the boardroom had not just survived the betrayal of the billionaire. She had conquered him entirely. She had suffered with grace, walked away with pride, and forced the most powerful man in the city to realize that the only empire worth ruling was the one they built together.